On the night Princess Diana died, Elton John was waiting for a call that never came. But there is one call he regrets not making, a single dial that could have changed their final months together forever. That silence, that hesitation, hangs over one of the most celebrated friendships in modern history like a ghost. We often think of Elton John and Princess Diana as an inseparable duo, the twin pillars of compassion who fought AIDS and stigma while the rest of the world looked away. We remember the tears at Westminster Abbey, the haunting notes of Candle in the Wind, and the way the world seemed to stop when he sang for her one last time. But the truth is far more complicated and far more painful. When Diana entered that tunnel in Paris in August 1997, she and Elton had only just reconciled after a brutal, freezing silence that had lasted for months. They were essentially estranged for a significant portion of her final year, and the weight of that lost time is something that Elton has carried with him ever since. It wasn't just a drift, it was a wall, built brick by brick out of pride, misunderstanding, and the toxic pressures of a life lived entirely in the glare of camera flashes. To understand why a simple phone call matters so much, we have to understand what they were to each other. This wasn't just a celebrity acquaintance, it was a survival pact. In the early 90s, Elton John and Princess Diana were arguably the two most famous people on the planet. They occupied a stratosphere of fame that is almost impossible to describe in today's fragmented media landscape. Everywhere they went, the oxygen was sucked out of the room. They bonded not just over charity, but over the sheer absurdity of their existence. They were the only two people who truly understood what it was like to be hunted by the press, to be worshipped by strangers, and to be lonely in a room full of people. Elton described their connection as instantaneous, a chemistry that felt like finding a lost sibling. They shared a wicked, sometimes dark sense of humor, often gossiping and laughing at the pomp and circumstance that surrounded them. For years, they were each other's safe harbor. When the palace protocols became too suffocating for Diana, Elton's world offered a chaotic, colorful, accepting escape. And for Elton, Diana offered a grace and a grounding force that pierced through his own chaotic lifestyle. They were the golden couple of the humanitarian world. But intense friendships, especially those forged in the fires of immense public pressure, are volatile. The rift that tore them apart is a masterclass in how easily pride can destroy love. It didn't start with a betrayal of secrets or a public insult, but with something surprisingly trivial that spiraled out of control: a coffee table book. The year was 1996. Elton John was collaborating with the legendary fashion designer Gianni Versace on a book titled Rock and Royalty. The project was intended to benefit the AIDS Foundation, a cause that was the beating heart of Elton and Diana's shared mission. On paper, it was a perfect collaboration. Diana had agreed to write the foreword, a gesture that would have guaranteed the book's success and raised millions for charity. But then the reality of the book's content came to light. This wasn't just a collection of portraits, it was a provocative piece of art. The book featured photos of the royal family, including Diana and her young sons, interspersed with images of semi-nude male models and the high-octane hedonistic imagery that Versace was famous for. To an artist like Elton Margiani, this was just juxtaposition, a celebration of beauty in all forms. But to Diana, who was navigating a precarious divorce and fighting to maintain her standing and credibility as a mother and a royal figure, it looked like a trap. She panicked. She feared the palace would use the book as ammunition to paint her as undignified or irresponsible. She worried that seeing her children placed next to risque imagery would cause a scandal she couldn't afford. So she pulled out. She didn't just pull out, she released a formal statement withdrawing her support. To Elton, this felt like a cold corporate slap in the face. He was blindsided. In his view, the charity mattered more than the optics. He couldn't understand why she was reacting with what he perceived as paranoia. He wrote in his memoir that he felt she was losing perspective, that the pressure of her life was making her see enemies where there were friends. The phone call that followed was short, sharp, and devastating. Words were exchanged,
Defenses were raised, and the receiver was slammed down. And then came the silence.
This is the deep freeze that defines the tragedy of their timeline. For months, two people who loved each other deeply refused to pick up the phone. It is a stubbornness that is universally human. We convince ourselves that we are in the right, that the other person needs to apologize first. We tell ourselves that there will be time to fix it later. Elton continued with his tour. Diana continued with her crusade against landmines. They moved in parallel lines, their paths never crossing, while the tabloids whispered about the cooling of their friendship. Every day that passed added another layer of cement to the wall between them. The tragedy is not just that they fought, but that they let the silence calcify. They let pride dictate the terms of their relationship during the very limited time they had left on this earth. The turning point, the shatter that broke the silence, was not a phone call of reconciliation, but another tragedy. In July 1997, Gianni Versace was murdered on the steps of his Miami mansion. The news sent shockwaves through the world, but for Elton and Diana, it was a mirror. Gianni was the third point in their triangle, the mutual friend whose art had inadvertently caused their rift. His death made the argument over a coffee table book seem suddenly, violently absurd. Who cares about a foreword when a friend is dead? Who cares about public image when mortality is staring you in the face? It was Diana who reached out first. She was on a boat in the Mediterranean when the news broke, and she immediately found a way to contact Elton. When she got him on the line, she didn't talk about the book. She didn't talk about the argument. She simply asked, "How are you holding up?" In that moment, the ice melted. The petty grievances of the last year evaporated in the heat of shared grief. She knew Elton would be devastated. Gianni was one of his closest confidants, and her instinct to comfort him overrode her pride. They cried together. They made plans to see each other at the funeral in Milan. It seemed, on the surface, that everything was fixed. The images of them at Versace's funeral are iconic. Diana leaning in to comfort a sobbing Elton, her hand on his arm, a look of profound sorrow and protection on her face. It was a public reconciliation that reassured the world. They were back. The dynamic duo had returned. But this is where the regret lives. This is where the story shifts from a simple makeup to a haunting what if. They had reconciled, yes, but they hadn't truly rebuilt. The funeral was in late July. Diana died on August 31st. They had roughly 6 weeks of restored friendship. The regret Elton carries, the one phone call he wishes he had made, isn't about the apology. They had already done that. It is about the maintenance of the bond during those critical final weeks. After the funeral, Diana went back to the Mediterranean, to the yacht, to Dodi Fayed, and to the relentless pursuit of the paparazzi. Elton went back to his home in Nice. They were geographically close, yet they didn't see each other. They didn't have that long, lazy dinner where they unpacked the trauma of the last year. They didn't have the late-night phone call where they promised to never let something so stupid come between them again. They assumed, as we all do, that there would be a September. They assumed that after the summer chaos died down, they would meet in London, have lunch, and laugh about the rock and royalty disaster. Elton has spoken about this with a heavy heart. He regrets that he didn't pick up the phone in those final weeks just to check in, just to solidify the peace they had made in the lawn. He regrets that he let the momentum of the reconciliation slow down. He regrets that he didn't invite her over to his villa in Nice, which was a stone's throw away from where she was. He was giving her space, respecting her privacy, perhaps thinking she needed time with her new romance. But looking back, he sees it as a missed opportunity to anchor her, to be the friend she needed as the press frenzy around her reached a fever pitch. He had the chance to pull her out of the storm, even for an afternoon, and he didn't take it because he thought he had time. This is the brutal lesson of the Elton-Diana story. It isn't just a story about two celebrities. It is a story about the assumption of permanence. We assume our friends will always be there. We assume that we can pause a relationship and hit play again whenever it suits us. We prioritize being right over being connected.
Elton John, a man with hundreds of millions of dollars, a knighthood, and global adulation, would trade it all for 5 minutes on the phone in August 1997. He would trade it all to tell her that the book didn't matter, that the photos didn't matter, that he loved her, and that she should come over for dinner away from the cameras.
Instead, the call he got was in the middle of the night, informing him of the crash. The call he got was the finality of death slamming the door on any future conversations. The reconciliation at the funeral became the final chapter rather than the start of a new one. It adds a layer of devastating poignancy to his performance of Candle in the Wind. When he sang Goodbye, England's Rose, he wasn't just mourning a princess, he was mourning a friend he had almost lost, then found again, only to lose permanently before the ink on their peace treaty was even dry.
The one phone call is a metaphor for every moment we let slip by. It represents the check-in we delay, the apology we withhold, the I love you we leave unsaid because we feel awkward. For Elton, the regret is specific and tangible. He knows that if he had called, if he had engaged more deeply in those final weeks, the trajectory of events might not have changed. Diana might still have been in Paris that night, but the emotional landscape of their ending would have been different. He would have known that she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, how much she was cherished. He would have deprived the silence of its power.
In the end, the relationship between Elton John and Princess Diana teaches us that pride is a luxury we cannot afford. The time we spend in deep freezes, giving people the silent treatment to teach them a lesson, is time we are stealing from ourselves. We are gambling with a future that is not guaranteed. Elton John has spent decades keeping Diana's memory alive, fighting for her causes and protecting her sons. But no amount of charity work can replace the sound of her voice on the other end of the line. That call, the one he didn't make in the quiet days of August, echoes louder than any song he has ever written. It is a silence that screams a warning to the rest of us. Make the call. Drop the ego. Make the call before the line goes dead forever.